Hare Krishna. So we'll start with the Mangala Charan. Om Majnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitamena Tasmai Sri Guruya Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Taktam Yena Putali Swayam Upagadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Udapatakalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Samsajivam Sadvaitam Saudupam Paljanasetam Krishna Chaitanya Devam श्री राधा कृष्ण पादान सागना ललिता श्री विशाखान्वितं च हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधो जगत्पति गोपेशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये पांचाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय हरे कृष्णा so today we are still in verse 36 of chapter 11 canto 1. We have been going through this verse for the past 2 weeks. So today will be the third and probably last session for this verse. So in the previous 2 weeks, our discussion was mostly related to Sanatana Dharma and Varnashrama Dharma, very in-depth and elaborate discussion based on Prabhupada's purports, especially from the Gita. So during the first week, we covered Sanatana Dharma, and last week we covered Varnashrama Dharma. So today we'll continue with the remainder of the purport. But before that, let's just go through the verse. Although the queen's beautiful smiles and furtive glances were all spotless and exciting, and although they could conquer Cupid himself by making him give up his bow in frustration, and although even the tolerant Shiva could fall victim to them, still, despite all their magical feats and attractions, they could not agitate the senses of the Lord. So here the description is regarding the glances of the queens of Dwarka, about how attractive they were, and still the Supreme Lord was not agitated. The senses of the Supreme Lord were not agitated, and that's exactly what makes him the Supreme Lord. Unlike the mortal beings in this material universe, not just for human beings, for all the living entities, there's always this attraction towards the opposite sex, not just among human beings, but it's there in all the living entities, in all the 84 lakh forms. So the description here, like how Cupid himself had to give up his bow in frustration. So we'll look at the implicit meaning of all this as we progress through the purport. So just we'll start back with from the beginning. The path of salvation, or the path going back to Godhead, always forbids the association of women, and the complete Sanatana Dharma or Varnashrama Dharma scheme forbids or restricts association with women. So what does it mean here? Prabhupada is saying that the complete Sanatana Dharma or Varnashrama Dharma scheme forbids or restricts association with women. First of all, what is the difference between Sanatana Dharma and Varnashrama Dharma? Are they exactly the same thing? or is there any minor difference? Anyone? We just we saw a lot of details regarding both Sanatana Dharma and Varnashrama Dharma in the past 2 weeks, the past 2 sessions. Anyone? Okay, so as we saw in the first session, like 2 weeks back, in our session related to Sanatana Dharma, Srila Prabhupada has given the detailed explanation in the introduction to Gita. In Bhagavad Gita as it is, there's a 30-page intro section. So in that book, for those who have the English version, the explanation starts in page number 15, starting from the last paragraph in page number 15. So from that point, Prabhupada gives detailed explanation regarding Sanatana Dharma. Prabhupada explains the meaning of Sanatana and Dharma. And then he explains how Sanatana Dharma is the eternal occupation or eternal Dharma of all living entities. And therefore, it is non-sectarian. Unlike the concept of religion, Dharma is non-sectarian. It applies to all the living entities, not just for human beings. But Varnashrama Dharma, as Krishna himself explains in Gita, anyone knows the exact verse we just discussed last week? Does anyone know which verse is it? About the 4 Varnas? Okay, in Gita, chapter 4, verse number 13, Krishna says, Chaturvanyam maya system, guna karma vibhagasa, tasya kartaram avimam, vidya kartaram avyayam. So Krishna talks about the 4 Varnas, and he clearly says that the 4 Varnas are based on gunas and karmas, guna karma vibhagasa. The division is based on gunas and karmas. Unlike what many so-called intellectuals who claim to be rationalists and atheists, they don't even know, they know nothing about Sanatana Dharma or Varnashrama Dharma. They get all their knowledge from cinema, serial, and WhatsApp University. Then they talk nonsense just to spread their propaganda. But as long as we study the authentic scriptures, and if we study Srila Prabhupada's purports, we can get the proper knowledge. So we don't have to simply believe in whatever nonsense those self-proclaimed intellectuals claim. So if we look at Varnashrama Dharma, there are two aspects to Varnashrama Dharma. First of all, there is the aspect of Varna and also the aspect of Ashrama. So here Prabhupada is mentioning that Varnashrama Dharma scheme forbids or restricts association with women. And before that, Sanatana Dharma is the spiritual goal of all the living entities, and it applies to all. But Varnashrama Dharma is specifically a materially designated system, which is mainly applicable to us, the human beings. So the two aspects of Varnashrama Dharma, Varna and Ashrama, we have seen regarding the 4 Varnas in detail last week. There are also further explanations in Gita chapter 18 regarding the 4 Varnas. So there's also this aspect of ashrama. There are also 4 ashramas. Many of the self-proclaimed intellectuals, they say that whenever we mention varnashrama, they simply say that, oh, it is the caste system. First of all, the word caste itself is a foreign word, and those so-called intellectuals, they don't even know that varnashrama talks about 2 aspects. The first aspect is regarding the 4 varnas, followed by the 4 ashramas. So in the 4 ashramas, it starts from brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa. So Prabhupada mentions here that varnashrama dharma forbids or restricts association with women. So what does it mean from the aspect of the 4 ashramas? First of all, Prabhupada is mentioning that it forbids or restricts. So it means that during the brahmacharya ashrama, that is from the beginning of our life, especially for boys who are sent to Gurukul, they have to practice celibacy, and they have to acquire knowledge. So there are some brahmacharis who choose to become Naishtika brahmacharis, meaning after the first ashrama, in the usual case, people get married and they practice the grihastha ashrama, but the Naishtika brahmacharis, they simply choose to remain brahmacharis for the rest of their life. So they don't go through the second and third ashramas, that is the grihastha ashrama and vanaprastha ashrama. So they remain brahmacharis throughout their life, and once they attain their advanced stage, they attain sannyasa. So from the first ashrama, for Naishtika brahmacharis, from the first ashrama, they proceed towards the 4th ashrama. But in the usual case, even in the case of many of Srila Prabhupada's direct disciples, they have been Naishtika brahmacharis. They were full-time brahmacharis and they attained sannyas. So from the first ashrama to the 4th ashrama. So if we consider the case of Naishtika brahmacharis, whether they are in the first ashrama or in the 4th ashrama, in both cases, for them, association with women is strictly forbidden. But even in the usual case, for those who leave their brahmacharya ashrama and proceed towards grihastha ashrama and engage in householder life, even for them, it is restricted. Even for a grihastha, the association with women or sensual enjoyment is restricted and it is best to be regulated. So only the householder who practices restricted and regulated sense enjoyment, even while being in grihastha ashrama, only that person is called a grihastha. Otherwise, those who do not practice the regulated householder life, they are known as grihamedis. So the grihamedis, they have no, they don't practice their householder life in Krishna consciousness, and therefore it is not different from living like cats and dogs. So that's what Prabhupada is explaining by these two keywords, forbids or restricts. In the case of Naishtika brahmachari, for them, whether they are in the first ashrama or the 4th ashrama, for them it is forbidden. But even for those who progress towards grihastha ashrama to lead householder life, still it is restricted and it is meant to be regulated. How then can one be accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is addicted to more than 16,000 wives? This question may be relevantly raised by inquisitive persons really anxious to know about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. Here, only the inquisitive persons who are truly inquisitive about gaining spiritual knowledge, those who are genuinely engaged in spiritual inquiry, only they have this type of genuine inquiries, and they can always clear their doubts by approaching a bona fide spiritual master and also by studying the authentic scriptures. But in the case of the self-proclaimed intellectuals, without even getting proper knowledge from the bona fide sources, they'll simply spread their propaganda with all sorts of malicious information or misinformation. So this is a very this is a completely transcendental topic which can only be understood by approaching the bona fide parampara. And to answer such questions, the sages at Naimisharanya have discussed the transcendental character of the Lord in this and in following verses. It is clear here that the feminine attractive features which can conquer Cupid or even the supermost tolerant Lord Shiva could not conquer the senses of the Lord. Cupid's business is to invoke mundane lust. So Cupid here is referring to Kamadev. So even Kamadev, like all the other demigods, even he is part of the material universe, but the Supreme Lord, who is the source of both material nature and also the spiritual world, so he is supreme. So Cupid or Kamadev's business is only to invoke mundane lust among the conditioned souls, the living entities of this material universe. So only that is his jurisdiction. So that's why he was completely incapable of agitating the senses of the Supreme Lord. Because even in Gita chapter 13, the chapter is regarding Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. So we as spirit souls, we are the knower of our own field, meaning our body. But the Supreme Lord, as Paramatma, he is the knower of all the fields. He knows about the Paramatma in within our heart. He knows about our body and also about everything that is going on in the hearts of all other living entities as the super soul. So in that chapter, there's also a verse which goes like Sarvendra Guna Vasham Sarvendra Jadam Asaktam Sarvavricheva Nirgunam Guna Bhoktacha. The verse is about how the Supreme Lord is the master of the senses and the master of all the material modes of nature. He is the master of all Indriyas and also the master of all the gunas, because this entire material nature is just a byproduct of the Supreme Lord's inferior material energy. And therefore, the 24 elements, the Mahatattva elements, whatever we are seeing in this material nature, they are nothing but permutations and combinations of these 24 raw ingredients, the Mahatattva elements. But the Supreme Lord, he himself is the source of all these elements. So he is the master of the senses and also the modes. Even the modes, the three modes of material nature, even the modes are a byproduct of the Supreme Lord's material energy. So that's why he is regarded as the master of the senses and the master of the modes. So in that verse, there's this word, Nirgunam. Nirgunam means that though he is the master of the senses and the master of the modes, he himself is not, he himself does not have material senses. Nirgunam does not mean that he does not have senses. He does not have material senses. All his senses are transcendental. So that's why the Supreme Lord's body is also described as the transcendental body. Even in Ishopanishad, if I'm not mistaken, in mantra number 8, there are descriptions about the Supreme Lord's body, about how the Lord is described as the one without any veins. Like for us, our material body is fully composed of material elements, and therefore it will grow and decay after a certain period of time. It has to the point where it has to be discarded towards the end of our life in this body. Even the body has to be discarded. So the soul will transmigrate to another material body. But for the Supreme Lord, even when he descends to this material world, he descends in his original transcendental form. So that transcendental form is not like our material body, which has got so many vulnerabilities. So that's why Lord Krishna, even when he left this material world, he lived up to the age of 125, but still he was always looking like a youth. So that is the description about the Lord's transcendental body, and even his senses are transcendental. So Cupid's business of invoking mundane lust is restricted to the jurisdiction of this material universe. Therefore, his powers were not applicable to the Supreme Lord. That's what made Cupid himself so agitated, to the point where he had to give up his bow, as we saw in the verse. The whole universe is moving, being agitated by Cupid's arrow. The activities of the world are being carried on by the central attraction of male and female. A male is searching after a mate to his liking, and the female is looking after a suitable male. That is the way of material stimulus. And as soon as a male is combined with a female, the material bondage of the living being is at once tightly interlocked by sex relation, and as a result of this, both the males and females' attraction for sweet home, motherland, bodily offspring, society, and friendship, and accumulation of wealth becomes the illusory field of activities, and thus a false but indefatigable attraction for the temporary material existence, which is full of miseries, is manifest. So here, Prabhupada is clearly mentioning about the central attraction of male and female. So this is another point we noted about how the business of Cupid to invoke mundane lust, though it is restricted to this material universe, but it does not apply only to human beings, but to all living entities. So this urge to enjoy sexual pleasure is there in all the living entities, in all the living entities who are encased in the 84 lakh material bodies, which is the cause of all the miseries. Because as soon as a male is combined with a female, the material bondage of the living being is at once tightly interlocked. Especially in the case of us, the human beings, the concomitant factors which kind of they emerge as a result of this, like once there are offsprings, our material needs keep growing and growing. So there's always the unceasing desire to accumulate material wealth, and as a result, it leads to further material entanglement. And that's why all this happens in the illusory field of activities. So we know that whatever material wealth that we accumulate, it all becomes useless the moment we leave the body. So it is not going to help us progress spiritually. Rather, it will only lead to further material entanglement if we don't make use of this precious human form of life, and if we are going to blindly let ourselves to become more materially entangled. It's not that we have to simply leave all our material duties, leave our families, and simply join the temple as full-time brahmacharis, which is certainly not possible. It is very completely infeasible alternative, because Krishna himself spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, who himself was a householder. The main message for Arjuna, especially in verse 8.7, Krishna says, Tasmat sarvesu kaleshu ma manusmara yudhyacha. Always do your duty by remembering me. So as long as we practice Krishna consciousness, and as long as we remember Krishna, we can still be spiritually engaged, though we are doing our material duties. So that should be our main goal in life, especially in this human form of life. Otherwise, if we are too blinded by material desires, then it is only going to result in further entanglement, and we may not be very lucky to regain this precious human form of life if we completely disregard the importance of practicing Krishna consciousness. So if, as long as we are too blinded by this illusory field of activities, thus a false but indefatigable attraction for the temporary material existence, which is full of miseries, is manifest. So whenever we talk about these material desires, no matter how much we try to fulfill our material desires, we simply cannot quench this thirst which is caused by material desires. No matter how much we accumulate wealth, even if we aim to buy some new car, maybe we like a certain model, but even after buying that, the urge will be there to get something even better. So it applies to all sorts of material desires. So it is simply not possible to fulfill those material desires. Rather, it will only make those material desires to keep growing, just like how the fire burns, keeps burning more as we pour oil into it. So that's why it all leads to this indefatigable attraction. Though we may know that all these material desires are temporary, still there's always the indefatigable attraction. And therefore, we are always further entangled. And in the process, we forget what Krishna said in Gita 8.15 about Dukkalaya Mashashvatam. Those who are therefore on the path of salvation for going back home, back to Godhead, are especially advised by all scriptural instruction to become free from such paraphernalia of material attraction. We know that nowadays, even whatever consumer products that we buy, especially nowadays, there's so much jargon about these so-called quality management systems. They talk about this standard, that standard, but whatever you buy, it becomes useless in just a matter of time. Then the company will not even try to repair the gadget, especially in the case of all these gadgets, whether it's a laptop or mobile phone. So the company will not try to repair the gadget, but they'll simply try to sell a new one. They'll simply tell us to buy the latest version. So all these material paraphernalia, they will only lead to further miseries. So that's why it is best to always remember what Krishna said about this Dukkalayam. Though we know that we are experiencing the all the threefold miseries in this Dukkalayam, still the power of Maya is so strong that we are still blinded by the indefatigable attraction for temporary material pleasures. So, Prabhupada always mentions regarding this tug of war. When the power of Maya is so strong, Maya will always pull us towards itself, but the onus is on us to further intensify our sadhana and surrender completely to Krishna, because that's what Krishna himself says in 7.14, in Gita 7.14. Krishna himself says that the power of Maya, which is a product of Krishna's inferior material energy, is so strong. It is undoubtedly strong for us, the conditioned souls, to surpass. But those who surrender to Krishna can easily overcome this force of Maya and cross over the ocean of material existence. But in order to do that properly, first of all, we must reduce all these desires for all these material paraphernalia and gradually get rid of all these material desires, because it is never possible to fulfill our material desires. We are only going to end up pouring more oil to the fire. So those who are on the path of salvation for going back home, back to Godhead, are especially advised by all scriptural instruction to become free from such paraphernalia of material attraction, and that is possible only by the association of the devotees of the Lord, who are called the Mahatmas. Cupid throws his arrow upon the living beings to make them mad after the opposite sex, whether the party is actually beautiful or not. As mentioned earlier, Cupid or Kamadev's jurisdiction within this material universe, it applies to all the living entities. So, not just for human beings, even among the animal species, even they are attracted to the opposite sex. So we know that a pig is not attractive to us, but among the pigs, they also have the attraction towards the opposite sex. So this indefatigable attraction is actually the major cause of all the miseries in this material universe, because it leads to further entanglement. Cupid's provocations are going on even among beastly societies who are all ugly looking in the estimation of civilized nations. So regardless of whether it's in the animal kingdom or even among human beings, there's always, it is a universal problem, because in all the societies, there's always the attraction towards the opposite sex. Thus, Cupid's influence is exerted even amongst the ugliest forms, and what to speak of the most perfect beauties. Lord Shiva, who is considered to be most tolerant, was also struck by Cupid's arrow, because he also became mad after the Mohini incarnation of the Lord and acknowledged himself to be defeated. Cupid, however, was himself captivated by the grave and exciting dealings of the goddesses of fortune, and he voluntarily gave up his bow and arrow in a spirit of frustration. So this is what was mentioned in the verse regarding how the queens of Dwaraka, how they were reacting after seeing Krishna when he returned to Dwaraka, and the description about their glances towards Krishna. Such was the beauty and attraction of the queens of Lord Krishna. So when the queens were glancing towards Krishna, so Cupid became ready for his main task of invoking mundane lust. So when he saw those glances of the queens of Dwarka towards Krishna, so he was he was trying to engage in his business of invoking mundane lust, but that was not applicable to the queens of Dwarka. So that's what made him to give up his bow and arrow in frustration, because in contrast to mundane lust among the conditioned souls, the love of the queens of Dwarka towards Krishna cannot be compared to mundane lust. Theirs is transcendental love or prema, the highest of the rasas. As we know, there are the 5 primary rasas: Shanta, Dasya, Shakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya. Madhurya rasa, or the rasa of conjugal love, has 2 categories. One is called Swakiya, another one is Parakiya. This Swakiya rasa is like lower to the Parakiya rasa, but the Swakiya rasa is the rasa experienced by the queens of Dwarka, and the Parakiya rasa is the one experienced by the gopis of Vrindavana. So even in the Goloka chart, the topmost destination of the spiritual abode, Goloka Vrindavana, then followed by Mathura and Dwarka. So even in the highest conjugal love rasa, there are these 2 levels, and in both levels, in this rasa of Madhurya rasa, it is all about transcendental love. So it cannot be compared to the mundane lust. Cupid's jurisdiction within the material universe is also only applicable to invoking mundane lust among the mortal living beings. But the queens of Dwarka are not like the conditioned souls in this universe. They are extremely elevated souls. That's why this Madhurya rasa is not easy to be achieved by anyone except the queens of Dwarka and the gopis of Vrindavana. Only they can experience this Swakiya and Parakiya rasa under the Madhurya rasa. So this mission of Cupid failed miserably because he himself was deluded into thinking that these glances of the queens of Dwarka were like similar to what happens in the mundane world. So that's why this transcendental love experienced by the queens of Dwarka and also the gopis of Vrindavana cannot be compared to mundane lust of the material world. So even from this one verse, we can clearly see that Cupid himself was deluded into misunderstanding the transcendental prema of these elevated devotees, the queens of Dwarka and also the gopis of Vrindavana. So that's why this is a completely transcendental topic which cannot be understood by the so-called intellectuals who only get their knowledge from WhatsApp University. Such was the beauty and attraction of the queens of Lord Krishna, yet they could not disturb the transcendental senses of the Lord. So on one hand, there's this description about how Cupid was deluded into comparing the glances of the queens of Dwarka to mundane lust. But it was clearly in they were experiencing the transcendental prema, so which cannot be compared to mundane lust of the material universe. And then on the other hand, though they were glancing so attractively towards the Supreme Lord, yet they could not disturb the transcendental senses of the Lord. So even the Supreme Lord, he himself was not like any mortal being of this universe whose senses get agitated when a member of the opposite sex is glancing over him. This is because the Lord is all perfect, Atmarama, or self-sufficient. He does not require anyone's extraneous help for his personal satisfaction. Even in Brahma Samhita, we know that from Brahma Samhita 5.1, Ishvara Paramakrishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Radhi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. The origin of everything. Govindam Adi Purusham. He is the origin of everything. So whether it is the material universe or even in the spiritual world, these are all like byproducts of his energies. The spiritual world is 3/4 of Krishna's energy, and the material world is 1/4 of his energy. But the entire creation itself is just a product of his energy. So he does not need, he does not have to depend on the product of his energy to satisfy himself. He himself is the origin of everything. Therefore, he does not have to depend on others to derive any personal satisfaction. However, there's also explanation about how Krishna reciprocates towards the love of his devotees. Being the perfect Atmarama, he does not require anyone's extraneous help for his personal satisfaction. Therefore, the queens could not satisfy the Lord by their feminine attractiveness, but they satisfied him by their sincere affection and service. Only by unalloyed transcendental loving service could they satisfy the Lord, and the Lord was pleased to treat them as wives in reciprocation. So the queens of Dwarka attained that elevated status after performing so much austerity, and therefore they were fortunate enough to experience the Madhurya Rasa. And the Lord himself was also merciful enough to reciprocate equally towards them. So even in Gita 4.11, Krishna says, Ye atamam pravatyanti tam tatayo badamyam mama vatmanu vatanti manushya patra sarvasa. So Krishna always rewards the devotees according to how the devotees surrender towards him. So this elevated position of the queens of Dwarka and also the gopis of Vrindavana, they are extremely elevated because that is the highest position of transcendental love. The Madhurya Rasa is the highest rasa, so which is only experienced by the queens of Dwarka, the Swakiya Rasa, and Parakiya Rasa by the gopis of Dwarka. So to satisfy his devotees who are serving him in the Madhurya Rasa, so Krishna reciprocates to them equally. So that is only that is the purpose of Krishna. He wants to reciprocate towards his devotees. It's not that he needs the queens of Dwarka to derive some pleasure, thus being satisfied by their unalloyed service only. The Lord reciprocated the service just like a devout husband. Otherwise, he had no business becoming the husband of so many wives. He is the husband of everyone, but to one who accepts him as such, he reciprocates. This unalloyed affection for the Lord is never to be compared to mundane lust. It is purely transcendental. So whenever there's this discussion about the queens of Dwarka, the 16,000 queens of Krishna in Dwarka, those who have very limited knowledge, they tend to compare it with some mundane concepts of the material world, like polygamy, and then they talk all sorts of nonsense, but they don't even understand about the transcendental nature of this topic, simply because the Supreme Lord was not traveling from one palace to another. there were 16,000 palaces in Dwaraka, and the Lord was personally present in all his various expansions. Even in, we can see from the Goloka chart, the original Swayam Rupa develops into many further expansions, and Lord Krishna was personally present in all the palaces of Dwaraka, interacting with all the queens personally. There was his personal presence in all the palaces, and there are also descriptions regarding this when Narada Muni visited the palaces in Dwaraka, where he could see that Lord Krishna was personally present in all the different palaces at the same time. So to compare it with the mundane matters of the material world is completely foolish, and that's why it's very important to gain proper knowledge about these transcendental topics by approaching the bona fide acharyas and the authentic scriptures, thus being satisfied by their unalloyed service only. The Lord reciprocated the service just like a devout husband. Otherwise, he had no business becoming the husband of so many wives. He is the husband of everyone. But to one who accepts him as such, he reciprocates. So these 16,000 queens of Dwaraka, they attain the elevated status of becoming the wife of Krishna after performing so many austerities, and Krishna himself gave them the position of being his queens in Dwaraka as a reciprocation towards their unalloyed service and unalloyed devotion. This unalloyed affection for the Lord is never to be compared to mundane lust. So regarding this, we have even seen many descriptions from the previous verses in this chapter about how Krishna was present. He was personally present in all the palaces with each and every queen at the same time. So it is completely foolish to compare it with mundane lust of the material world. This unalloyed affection for Lord is never to be compared to mundane lust. It is purely transcendental, and the grave dealings which the queens displayed in natural feminine ways were also transcendental, because the feelings were expressed out of transcendental ecstasy, meaning prema, the highest form of love in the Madhurya Rasa. So it can only be experienced by the most elevated of devotees. So they are the queens of Dwarka and also the gopis of Vrindavana. It is already explained in the previous verse that the Lord appeared like a mundane husband, but factually, his relation with his wives was transcendental, pure, and unconditioned by the modes of material nature. Again, the Lord being the source of everything, so none of his energies could satisfy him. He does not need the products of his energy to satisfy him, because he himself is the source of all the different energies. In the spiritual world, we have even seen regarding the divisions of all these energies. When we talk about the superior energy of Krishna in the spiritual world, so that is the source. The spiritual energy of Krishna is the source for the entire spiritual creation, which is the third fourth of the total creation. So regarding the spiritual energy, there are three features. Satchit Ananda. Satchit Ananda are three features of Krishna's spiritual energy, and they also correspond to three types of energy: Sandhini, Samvit, Lagni. So the Sat feature corresponds to Sandhini, the Sandhini energy. Chit feature corresponds to the Samvit energy, and Ananda feature corresponds to the Lagni feature. So even the spiritual energy originates from Krishna himself, and the much inferior material energy, which is only 1/4 of his entire energy, even that also originates from Krishna. So even the three modes of material nature, they are also byproducts of Krishna's inferior material energy. So none of these products or byproducts of Krishna's energy could influence him, or he does not really need these byproducts of his energy to satisfy him. That's why it was not, it's not like Krishna needed the queens of Dwaraka, but he gave them the position of becoming his queens in order to reciprocate towards them, to reward them for their devotion towards him. So it is completely foolish to compare this loving devotion of the queens of Dwaraka towards Krishna, and also his reciprocation towards them, to some mundane lust of the material world. That's why Prabhupada is also reinforcing that his relation with his wives was transcendental, pure, and unconditioned by the modes of material nature. Even when Krishna descends to the material world, he descends in his transcendental body. Though he appears in a human-like form, like the mortal beings of this material world, he actually descends in his transcendental body, and his nature itself, starting from his appearance and his body, his senses are all transcendental, and therefore he needs nothing material to satisfy him, because even the transcendental nature is above everything. It is neither spiritual nor material, but it is above everything. So that's why even in Gita chapter 15, in verses 16 to 18, there is a description about how the conditioned souls of this material world, they are known as the fallible souls, the fallible beings, and the liberated souls are regarded as infallible. But in verse 18 of chapter 15, in Gita 15.18, Krishna says about how he is Purushottama, meaning he is transcendental to everything else. So even in the spiritual world, there are infallible beings. The conditioned souls who are presently in this material universe, they are regarded as the fallible beings, and the liberated souls in the spiritual world, they are regarded as infallible. But Purushottama, who is the transcendental supreme person, he is beyond both. He is even beyond the infallible being. Therefore, the transcendental Purushottama, he is never influenced by all these material energy or even the modes of material nature, and therefore he does not need anything that is material to satisfy his transcendental self. So again, this is a very transcendental topic, and therefore it can only be understood by those who study the authentic scriptures and commentaries or purports by the bona fide acharyas. So we have completed the verse. Any questions or comments? Okay, so we'll meet again next week. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, sir. Thank you.